Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video with Swaggle. And in this video, we got ourselves Go Collect's hottest trending comics for the week of October 2nd. I hope you all had a great weekend. It's Monday. You know what that means. We got to talk about some hot books. Now, for those who don't know, Go Collect puts out weekly articles that analyze the hottest selling comic books based on volume of sales and sudden movement in the market. So think of these books as books that are really starting to get liquid out there. But before we get into the video, if you guys could drop me a like or a comment or subscribe if you're enjoying the content, helps support the channel, doing those things, I would appreciate it. But let's get into this video here today. Now, of course, I'll put a link in the description like I always do. This article is written by Matt Tuck. You guys know this by now. But coming in here at the number 5 spot, we got to talk about this book right here, Star Wars The Mandalorian, #1, new to the list this week, now sitting in the 86th slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, this is the book that came out in 2022 by Georges Gentry that would feature the first appearance of Din Djarin, the Mandalorian. Now, I say first appearance, but there might be some controversy to that. This is the first in-story comic book appearance, but the Mandalorian, technically speaking, has had some other cover appearances, most notably the Darth Vader #20 with the Peach Momoko cover. There's the gold border for that one. There's the silver border for that one. And there's some other arguable appearances as well. But generally speaking, this has now become kind of the go-to comic book for his in-story first appearance. And this one is really interesting to think about for the future. I mean, we all know that we have The Mandalorian on Disney Plus, a very successful show. We are going to be getting another season of it. And the question kind of remains for a lot of comic book collectors is how much Din Djarin are we going to get in the Star Wars universe moving forward? I mean, it feels like Star Wars is sort of laying the foundation to kind of build up to some big, Thrawn event or Thrawn movie. And it feels like Mando is going to be a big part of that. And potentially it feels like Mando could eventually become the Mandalorian figure that is sort of the one that all of the new Star Wars fans, come to think about when they think about bounty hunters, etc., even more so than that of Boba Fett, which makes this book very, very attractive for the future. Now, there is one thing about this book. It came out, of course, this year in 2022, and there were a lot of copies. I don't know about you guys, but when I went to my LCS, there were stacks and stacks of this thing. So it's really hard to say if this particular book is ever going to really, explode in value. There are some rare variants to this, like 1 in 25s, 1 in 50s, things like that. Those could definitely command some value later on in the future. But for right now, this seems to be a book that people want to get their hands on, especially at that 9.8 grade. We know we got The Mandalorian coming, and that's why it's one of the hottest comics of the week. But as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of those values here. 9.8s have 507 on the census. Fair market value suggests around the $50 range, 30-day moving $58. Again, very, very affordable if you're somebody who just likes this book in a slab. Obviously, you can see like a lot of books that are new. The pre-orders came out at like around the $90 price point. Now they're back down to the $56 price point. So, this is kind of that time where if you're somebody who's like, hey, let me just pick up a 9.8 slab, $50, no big deal, let me go grab it. And when you go onto eBay looking for raw copies of this thing, typically you can still find them being sold around cover price, anywhere between $5 to $10. All right, let's move on now to the 4th hottest trending comic of the week. And the 4th hottest trending comic of the week is one that has had a huge fall from grace, one that is cool to actually talk about. But this one right here is Werewolf by Night #32, new to the list this week. Yes, that is right. This book actually fell out of the top 100 and is now sitting in the 67th slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, this is the book written by Doug Moench that came out in 1975 that would feature the first appearance of the character known as Moon Knight. Now, we all know that Moon Knight made his debut in the MCU, played by Oscar Isaac, and I would say that generally speaking, it felt like a lot of the fans did not like the TV show overall. In my opinion, I think Oscar Isaac did an amazing job, and I think that there's a bright future for him playing this character, but I would agree that the show was a little bit lackluster, and that caused a lot of comic book collectors to be big sellers for this book because the prices for this particular book right here have absolutely tanked, even more so than that of the pullback that we're seeing in the current state of the economy. This is a book that, I would argue is back in the trend line in terms of its value, which makes it a very good time to actually buy this book, no matter what grade you're looking at it. And I think a lot of collectors are starting to realize that, and that's one of the reasons why this book is on Go Collect's hot list this week, moving a lot of volume out there in the market. Now, as Matt points out in the article, one of the other reasons that there could be eyeballs on this book is due to the fact that we're now kind of approaching the Werewolf by Night Halloween special. People are just thinking about Werewolf by Night books. People are thinking, hey, maybe even Moon Knight makes a cameo at the end. And And as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. This one I think is really interesting. 9.8s have 19 on the census. Fair market value suggests 56,000. There was a sale during the height of the comic book market, or at least the height of this particular show, that went for $70,500. And this book was off-white pages, where if you look just recently, this book at 9.8 grade sold for $42,000 with white pages in a new CGC label. That's got to hurt if you're somebody out there who paid 70 grand for your book, and recently this book went for 42. Not very often that you would see a 9.8 grade of a book where there's only 19 copies out there that would go for that much less. I mean, I definitely think that the value of this book shot up too fast, going up to that $70,000 price point, but that is a really steep decline for a book that, when we're talking about the 9.8 grade, is very, very rare. So pretty crazy to see that overall, how much this book has dropped off. Let's take a look at some of the other grades here. 7.0s, 392 on the census. Fair market value is 1,500. 30-day moving is selling kind of right in line to that at 1,550. And you can see just from the flow of the chart how much this book has dropped back off from the earlier this year. But that's kind of a good sign because, again, we talk about the trend line. You can see how even in steady, it's been rising up throughout the years, all the way back since 2013. And now kind of where prices are for the 7.0 range is kind of bringing it back in line to the trend, which makes it a good buying opportunity if you ask me. And then down here at the bottom, 4.0s selling around that $1,000 price point. And then, 2.0s, there are some graded books out there if you want to get your hands on. But typically speaking, if you're going to eBay looking for raw copies or really low grade copies of this thing, it's still going to set you back around that $800 price point. All right, let's move on now to the third hottest trending comic of the week. And the third hottest trending comic of the week is one that shouldn't be surprising to be one of the hottest trending comic books this week. But what book am I talking about? Well, of course, I'm talking about Wolverine number 88, new to the list this week, now sitting in the 23rd slot, all the way from out of the list, out of the top 100 into the 23 slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, this is the book that came out in 1994, written by Larry Hama, that would feature the first meeting of Wolverine and Deadpool. Now, unless you guys have been living under a rock this past week, you guys already know that we got the announcement from Ryan Reynolds that Hugh Jackman is going to be returning as Wolverine in Deadpool number 3. And the comic book market absolutely lost their minds for Hulk 181, New Mutants 98, and maybe this book right here, they lost their minds even more for this one. This one, Wolverine number 8, the first meeting of these two characters. I mean, don't get me wrong, this is a very cool cover, a very cool book overall, but the amount of volume and the prices that this book was selling for was crazy out there in the market. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but everywhere I looked, this book was up for sale. So many sales on eBay, so many Instagram accounts, selling this book. Everybody was going nuts for this particular copy. But as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. 9.8s have 264 in the census. Fair market value suggests $500. 30-day moving, definitely moving in line to that. Now, there are a few interesting things about this book because there's 3 different versions. You have the direct edition, you have the deluxe edition, which is the one that Go Collect is listing right here, and then you have the newsstand edition. Very, very hard to, kind of differentiate all of these books. Let me kind of see if I can show you guys here. But the newsstand edition, of course, is going to have a different price down here in the lower left. And then the deluxe edition, you can see right there, it says X-Men Deluxe underneath, which I guess you could kind of say deluxe is sort of the second printing of this book, but it does feel like the deluxe edition is commanding a little bit more of a premium overall. I saw it selling for upwards of $800. Now, surprisingly, this book in 2021 was selling for higher than it is today. That goes to show how much, this one has been spec'd on already. And then the newsstand copies, I think, are selling for, twice that. I definitely see them crossing that 4-figure range. And of course, down here at the bottom, 1994 book. Not going to see it totally slapped to the low grade, but now when you go into eBay looking for raw copies of this thing, typically you see them being sold around that $100 to $120 range. All right, let's move on now to the second hottest comic of the week. And the second hottest comic of the week is one that, of course, makes sense. I mean, we talked about Wolverine. Now we got to talk about New Mutants 98. Not necessarily up any spots right now in this article, but it is sitting on the number 10 slot. And as Matt points out in the article itself, he does say that he expects later on this week, once the numbers are updated, for this book to be in the top 5. But what book are we talking about? New Mutants 98. What is the significance of of this. First appearance of Deadpool, the book that came out in 1991, written by Rob Liefeld. Now, like I just mentioned, we got the announcement from Ryan Reynolds that Hugh Jackman is going to be returning as Wolverine. Just the fact that we are getting, Deadpool 3 has got people excited once again. In my video where I was talking about the D23 stuff, I made mention that I thought New Mutants 98 would get an uptick in terms of the volume of sales and potentially the values as well, due to the fact that, once they announce Deadpool number 3, people are just going to be excited once again. But we didn't get that announcement then, and now that we did get it, you do see this book moving quite a lot out there in the market. And this is one of those ones where I feel like it might be a good time to consider buying this once again. It feels like collectors are thinking that as well, because this is a book that has really been on a steep decline ever since the height of 2021. We do know that Deadpool is going to be a very pivotal player in the MCU moving forward for quite some time. It does feel like with them bringing Hugh Jackman back into the fold, that Deadpool 3, even though it's going to be, obviously a comedy, it does feel like it'll probably be a very important film to kind of the multiverse saga. And I think that Disney really values Ryan Reynolds and the Deadpool character. I think the Deadpool character really resonates with the younger audiences quite a bit. But as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. There actually is one 10.0, there's 12 9.9s. Haven't been a sale for the 9.9 since 2017, but the 9.8s, let's talk about them. 3,892, quite a lot. 21,000 universal grades overall. Fair market value suggests $1,500. 30-day moving is $1,561. But as you can see from the graph, this is a book that has been on a really steep decline ever since the height of 2021, when books were selling for $2,600. Now they're $1,000 left at the $1,500 mark. If we go before the boom, this book was kind of sitting at that $966 price range. Let's call it $1,000. So where it kind of sells today, maybe still a little bit hot if we're thinking about the trend line overall. But generally speaking, now is not necessarily the worst time to buy this book. I think if you were to have gotten this for the $1,300 price point, you'd be kind of right in line to the trend overall. But it'll be interesting to see where this book goes from here. And then, of course, down here at the bottom, not going to always see it slabbed at the low grade, although there are some copies that are going to be slabbed at that area. But typically speaking, when you go onto eBay looking for a raw copy, that presents decently, you can usually find them now selling around that $350 to $400 price point. All right, let's move on now to the hottest trending comic of the week. And the hottest trending comic of the week is a classic, a goodie here. We got Spawn #1, up 2 spots, now putting it in the #2 most bought and sold comic book out there in the market. And why is that the case? Because this is the book that came out in 1992, written by Todd McFarlane, that would feature the first appearance of the character known as Spawn. Now, all Todd McFarlane books have been hot recently due to the fact that CGC made an announcement that we were going to be getting a Todd McFarlane signing. So everything Todd has been selling out there, everything Todd has been moving out there, and this is still one that is, generally speaking, pretty affordable overall. I mean, I usually like to say the prices for later on, but I feel like it's important context to talk about. I mean, you can find a raw copy around that $25, $30, $40 range. And if you're somebody who just wants to capitalize on the Todd McFarlane CGC signing, this is probably one of the better books that you can very easily acquire for yourself, which is one of the reasons why this book has been moving so much. I mean, it's always a book that is on the hot list. It's always a book that is in demand or selling or moving because there's just so many copies out there, and it's one that every comic book collector wants to have in their collection. But we got this uptick because people are thinking, hey, this is an easy way to get a cool book signed by Todd McFarlane. Let me get my hands on Spawn #1. And as we dig into the numbers, let's take a look at some of the values here. At the 10.0 range, we actually have 6 copies. At the 9.9 range, we got 69 copies. There was a sale earlier this year for $4,700 at that 9.9 level. But let's talk about the 9.8s. CGC has 10,234 on the census. Let's put that into perspective for a second. Now, the universal grade has 21,365, which is basically, in line to what New Mutants 98 had. But as you can see on the 9.8 level, there's 10,000 here, whereas New Mutants 98 at the 9.8 level only had about 3,000. So much easier to get this book in 9.8 grade for whatever reason, which is why the value reflects what it does. Fair market value is only $190. 30-day moving is $189. This is a book that, like many others, has had a little bit of a pullback from 2021, but is still selling higher now today than it was, in 2020. And it'll be curious to see where this book book goes from here. And then of course down here at the low grade 1992 book, not going to see it slabbed too often, but when you go into eBay looking for raw copies, like I mentioned earlier, you can find them around that $25 to $30 to $40 range, depending on the deal and depending on the grade. Anyways, that is all for this video. Those were Go Collect's hottest trending comics for the week. Let me know what you guys think. Did you guys FOMO on the Wolverine 88? Drop me a like, comment, subscribe if you're enjoying the content, and I'll see you in the next video.